The clinking of silverware against fine china was the only sound for a long, stretched moment. It felt louder than it should, each tap of a fork a small, sharp judgment in the cavernous dining room of the Thorne estate. Liam felt the weight of the silence, a familiar pressure that settled over him whenever he sat at this polished mahogany table. Across from him, his father-in-law, Richard Thorne, dabbed his lips with a linen napkin, his expression a mask of bored tolerance. Beside Liam, his wife Chloe swirled the deep red wine in her glass, her gaze fixed anywhere but on him. Richard cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being turned over. "I was speaking with Marcus Finch the other day," he began, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no. "His daughter just married that tech fellow, sold his company for, what was it, 9 figures? Set for life. A real powerhouse." He looked pointedly at Liam, a glint in his eye that was anything but kind. "Some people just have that drive, you know, the killer instinct." Liam placed his fork down gently, his hands resting in his lap. He had learned long ago that reacting to Richard's provocations was a losing game. He was a master of the implied insult, the conversational jab dressed up as idle observation. Liam, an architect, was, in Richard's world, a glorified draftsman, a man who worked with his hands and his mind, but not in the hallowed halls of finance or corporate rating where real money was made. "Architecture is a noble profession," Liam said, his voice even and calm. "It's about creating things that last, homes for families, spaces for communities. There's a different kind of value in that." Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Value? Son, value is a number on a balance sheet. It's market share, it's leverage. Everything else is a hobby." He took a large gulp of his wine, his eyes scanning Liam as if he were a disappointing line item on a quarterly report. This was the dance, the same one they had performed at every family gathering for the past 5 years. Richard would pontificate on wealth and power, Chloe would grow visibly tense and embarrassed, and Liam would absorb the condescension with a quiet dignity that only seemed to infuriate his father-in-law more. But tonight felt different. The air was thicker, charged with an unspoken animosity that had been festering for months. Chloe had been distant, her affection curdling into a kind of resentful disappointment. She had married him when he was a rising star at a prestigious firm, a man with a promising future. But 2 years ago, Liam had left that firm to go independent, a move she had interpreted as a retreat, a failure of ambition. He worked from a small, rented office downtown, his projects seemingly modest, his income respectable, but a universe away from the Thorne family's generational wealth. Chloe finally spoke, her voice sharp, brittle. "Dad, please." It was a token defense, one that lacked any real conviction. "No, let the man speak for himself," Richard barreled on, enjoying his sport. "Tell me, Liam, what's the grand vision? Still designing kitchen extensions for dentists in the suburbs?" Before Liam could answer, Chloe set her glass down with a sharp click. Her face was flushed, a mixture of wine and shame. She turned to her father, but her words were aimed like daggers at her husband. "It's not his fault, Dad," she said, and the apparent defense was the most brutal attack of all. "He is what he is. I had hoped for more." She then turned her gaze fully on Liam, and the love that had once been in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard appraisal. "My friends are marrying partners, people who build empires, and she paused, letting the cruelty of the moment hang in the air. "I ended up with the downgrade." The word landed in the center of the table and shattered the fragile peace. A downgrade. It was so direct, so utterly dismissive, that even Richard seemed momentarily taken aback. It was one thing for him to bully his son-in-law. It was another for his own daughter to eviscerate her husband with such casual contempt. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply met her gaze, his own eyes, usually warm and gentle, now holding a deep, unreadable calm. He felt the familiar weight in his breast pocket, the slight bulge of the thin, leather-bound journal he carried everywhere. Inside it, amidst sketches of buildings and notes on materials, were the final, signed documents that represented a truth so monumental it would have vaporized the entire conversation. Inside that journal was the proof that he, the Downgrade, had 3 weeks ago, through his silent investment firm, completed the acquisition of a controlling stake in the over-leveraged and struggling company known as Thorn Construction. He thought of the phone call he'd had that morning with his board, discussing the strategic dismantling of Richard's inefficient and nepotistic management structure. He thought of the file on his desk detailing the very project Richard was currently mismanaging into the ground, the one that would soon bring the company to its knees and make his takeover not just a strategic victory, but a necessary rescue. He was not a Downgrade. He was the man who now owned his wife's father's entire empire, and they had absolutely no idea. Within a month, their world, built on the illusion of unassailable status, would crumble, and he would be the one holding the hammer. This story is just beginning to unfold, and the journey from this painful moment to the final, shocking revelation is one you won't want to miss. We love having you with us for these stories, and it helps us so much if you take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And just for fun, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to that silent car ride home, where the consequences of that single, terrible word began to take root. The drive back to their modern, minimalist house, a house Liam had designed himself, was a study in oppressive silence. The sleek interior of the car, usually a space of comfort and quiet conversation, felt like a pressurized chamber. Chloe stared out the passenger window, the city lights painting fleeting, distorted streaks across her face. Her profile was rigid, a statue of cold fury and regret. Liam drove with a steady, practiced ease, his knuckles not white on the steering wheel, his breathing even. An outside observer would have seen a man at peace, but inside a quiet storm was raging. It was not a storm of anger, but of sorrow. He had loved Chloe for her fire, her passion, her vibrant energy that had seemed to complement his own quiet strength. He had seen her ambition not as a flaw, but as a part of the engine that drove her. He had believed they were building a life together, a partnership. But he had been naive. He had mistaken her desire for success with a desire for shared growth. He saw now, with devastating clarity, that she had never wanted a partner. She had wanted an accessory, an emblem of status that would reflect her own perceived worth back at her. And when his career path had deviated from the one she had envisioned, he had ceased to be a man she loved and had become a problem she had to manage, a social liability, a downgrade. "Are you going to say anything?" she finally asked, her voice tight, not looking at him. "What would you like me to say, Chloe?" Liam responded, his tone measured. It wasn't a question designed to provoke, but a genuine inquiry. He was trying to understand the geography of the new, desolate landscape between them. "I don't know," she snapped, turning to face him, her eyes flashing. "You could get angry. You could yell. You could defend yourself. But you just sit there, so calm, so passive. It drives me crazy. It's like nothing matters to you." "Many things matter to me," he said softly. "Our marriage matters to me. My integrity matters to me. Being treated with respect matters to me." "Respect?" She let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, you want respect?" "Liam, respect is earned. My father built an empire from the ground up. Marcus Finch's son-in-law built a billion-dollar company. What have you built? A portfolio of deck renovations and a few nice houses? How can you expect the same level of respect?" He pulled the car into their driveway, the engine cutting out with a soft whir, plunging them into a deeper silence. The house stood before them, a testament to his actual skill. It was a structure of clean lines, glass walls, and warm cedar, perfectly integrated with the surrounding landscape. It had won 2 architectural awards. Chloe had been immensely proud of it once. Now, it seemed, she just saw it as a house, 4 walls and a roof. The value of a person isn't measured by the size of their bank account, Chloe, he said, finally turning to her. I thought you believed that once. I believed a lot of things, she retorted, her voice softening slightly, a hint of desperation creeping in. I believed you were going to be a giant in your field. You were on track to be the youngest partner at Sterling and Croft. Everyone said you were a genius. Then you just quit. To do what? To find your own voice. It sounds like something a trust fund kid says, not a man trying to build a life. He could have told her then. He could have explained that he left Sterling and Croft because their ethics were becoming questionable, because they valued profits over craftsmanship, and because he had just inherited his grandfather's vast, but quietly managed, investment portfolio. A portfolio that had grown exponentially under his patient, strategic guidance over the last 5 years. His grandfather, a man who valued substance over style, had taught him that true power was silent. Let other men have the fame, he used to say. You have the control. Liam had taken that lesson to heart. He had created Aethelred Capital as a holding company, a ghost in the machine of the financial world, making careful, deliberate acquisitions. He enjoyed his architecture. It was his passion, his art. The capital was his tool, his security. He had never felt the need to flash it, to wear it like a gaudy suit. He thought Chloe would understand that. He thought she loved him, not his potential for generating wealth. My work has meaning to me, was all he said. And my feelings don't? She shot back, her voice rising again. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is? To sit at that table while my father, my own father, pities you, while all our friends are buying yachts and summer homes and we're not? I feel like I'm falling behind, and you're the anchor holding me back. The word anchor struck him almost as hard as downgrade. An anchor, something that prevents movement, something that drowns you. He looked at the woman he had married, her face contorted with a frustration that was so profound, so deeply rooted in a set of values he could no longer comprehend, and he felt a chasm open between them, wider and deeper than the Grand Canyon. She wasn't just disappointed in his career, she was ashamed of him. He got out of the car. He didn't slam the door. He walked to the front entrance of the beautiful home he had designed, a home that now felt like a hollow shell. He could hear her sobbing in the car, the raw, angry sobs of someone who felt deeply wronged. But for the first time, he felt no urge to go back and comfort her. The comfort she wanted was not something he could give. She didn't want his love or his reassurance. She wanted him to be someone else, and that was a price he was unwilling to pay. He walked inside, the cool air of the foyer washing over him, and knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his marriage was over. The only thing that remained was the fallout. The following Sunday was a command performance at the Thorne Estate, a family brunch. It was a tradition Liam had once found charming, a relic of a bygone era of familial cohesion. Now, it felt like a summons. After the disastrous dinner, Chloe had barely spoken to him. They moved through their home like ghosts, the unspoken tension a constant, humming presence. She had informed him of the brunch via a clipped, formal text message, as if he were a subordinate. Brunch at my parents' Sunday, 11 a.m., don't be late. Liam considered refusing. He considered telling her he was done with the charade, done with the ritual humiliations. But that would be a reactive move, an emotional outburst. His strategy, both in business and now in his crumbling personal life, was one of patience, of deliberate action. He needed to see this through. He needed to let them play their hands, to reveal the full extent of their arrogance. Their blindness was his greatest asset. So he agreed to go. He dressed in his usual weekend attire, dark, well-fitting jeans, a simple gray cashmere sweater, and worn leather boots. It was a uniform of understated quality, but to the Thorne family, it might as well have been rags. When he came downstairs, Chloe was waiting by the door, dressed in a crisp, white designer dress that probably cost more than his entire outfit. She eyed him up and down, a faint sneer playing on her lips. "Are you really wearing that?" she asked. "It's brunch, Chloe, not the Met Gala," he replied calmly. "You know what I mean. You could at least try to look successful." "This is what I look like," he said, holding her gaze. "If you're ashamed to be seen with me, we can take separate cars." Her eyes widened in anger, but she bit back a retort. The truth in his statement was too sharp to argue with. They drove in silence, a repeat of the journey from a few nights before. The brunch was in full swing when they arrived. The sprawling, flagstone patio was crowded with Richard's affluent friends and their families. The air buzzed with talk of stocks, politics, and summer plans in the Hamptons. It was a bubble of immense privilege, and Liam felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. Richard, holding court near the outdoor bar, spotted them. A broad, predatory smile spread across his face as he made his way over, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Liam, glad you could make it," he boomed, clapping Liam on the shoulder with a force that was meant to be friendly but felt more like a blow. "Chloe, darling, you look stunning." He kissed his daughter's cheek, then turned his full, overbearing attention back to Liam. "Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night." Liam braced himself. He knew this was not going to be an apology. "You're a smart kid," Richard continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur, though it was still loud enough for several nearby people to hear. "You've got talent, you're just adrift, no direction, wasting that big brain of yours on patios and sunrooms." Chloe looked at the ground, her posture radiating a familiar mix of shame and anticipation. She knew what was coming. "So," Richard said, puffing out his chest, "I've decided to help you out. I'm creating a new position for you at Thorne Construction, a junior design associate in the planning department. It's not glamorous, mind you. You'll be double-checking blueprints, coordinating with suppliers. Basic stuff. But it's a foot in the door, a real door. It'll give you a steady paycheck, some proper benefits, and a chance to learn how the real world works. What do you say?" The offer hung in the air, thick and insulting. It was a masterpiece of condescension. He was offering Liam a menial, entry-level job in his own company, framing it as an act of profound charity. He was doing it publicly, positioning himself as the benevolent patriarch lifting up his hapless son-in-law. Several people who had overheard were now watching, their expressions a mixture of pity for Liam and admiration for Richard's supposed generosity. Liam felt a flicker of heat, a rare spark of pure anger. He could have ended it right there. He could have laughed in Richard's face. He could have pulled out his phone and shown him the Aethelred Capital homepage, the firm that now held the mortgage on Richard's entire world. But he held back. The final act was not yet ready. The stage was still being set. He looked at Richard, a calm, almost pitying expression on his face. "Richard," he said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying clearly in the sudden lull in conversation. "That is an incredibly generous offer, but I'm going to have to decline." A ripple of surprise went through the small crowd. Richard's smile faltered. "Decline? Why on earth would you decline? This is a lifeline I'm throwing you." "I appreciate the gesture," Liam said, choosing his words with surgical precision. "But I'm quite committed to my current projects. My firm is at a very critical stage of expansion, and I can't afford to be distracted." The phrase "firm" and "expansion" were said with such quiet confidence that it momentarily threw Richard off his game. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even tears. He had not expected a polite, firm rejection. "Your firm?" Richard repeated, a sneer returning to his face. "Right, your little one-man band. Well, don't come crying to me when it all goes south. The offer's on the table for a week. After that, you're on your own." He turned his back on Liam, dismissing him completely, and strode back to the bar, his audience trailing after him, murmuring about Liam's foolish pride. Chloe looked at Liam, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "How could you embarrass me like that? He was trying to help us. He was giving you a way out, a way to be respectable, and you threw it back in his face." "He was trying to humiliate me, Chloe," Liam said, his patience finally wearing thin. "And you stood there and let him. He wasn't offering me a job. He was offering me a collar. I am not his pet." "You're an idiot," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears of pure rage. "You're a proud, stubborn idiot, and you're going to drag me down with you." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the patio. He was an island, isolated by their judgment. But as he watched her go, rejoining the tribe that valued balance sheets over backbone, he did not feel like an idiot. He felt a profound sense of clarity. The lines had been drawn. They saw him as a failure, a charity case, a fool. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was already beginning to crumble, and he was the one who would decide how hard they would fall. He took a slow sip of his water, the cool liquid a balm to his frayed nerves. The quiet before the storm had just begun. The week that followed was a strange duality. In his personal life, a deep Arctic winter had set in. Chloe had moved into the guest bedroom. Their communication was reduced to terse, necessary exchanges about bills and household logistics. The warmth of their home had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, sterile silence. She treated him with a contemptuous pity, the way one might treat a once-beloved pet that had become old and inconvenient. She was mourning the life she thought she deserved, and he was the living embodiment of her disappointment. But when Liam stepped out of that cold house and into the bustling city, his world transformed. A short drive took him from the quiet residential street to the heart of the financial district. There, on the 45th floor of a gleaming glass and steel tower, was the real center of his universe, the offices of Ethelred Capital. The name was an intentional piece of misdirection, a nod to an obscure Anglo-Saxon king, chosen for its historical weight and its utter lack of modern flash. The firm itself operated on the same principle. It was a ghost in the financial pages, a silent partner in dozens of companies, its influence vast but its public profile non-existent. The office was not the loud, testosterone-fueled trading floor Chloe probably imagined when she thought of power. It was a serene, almost academic space. Walls were lined with books on history, economics, and philosophy. The few employees were quiet, brilliant analysts and strategists, many of whom Liam had personally recruited from the top of their fields. Here Liam was not the downgrade. He was not the pity case. He was the founder and chief strategist, the man they simply called the architect. It was a nickname born of his unique approach to investment. He saw companies as structures to be redesigned, reinforced, and built to last, not as assets to be stripped and flipped. He spent that week in his corner office, a minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city. Before him, spread across a massive oak table, were the complete financials and strategic plans for Thorn Construction. It was a grim picture. For years, Richard had been running the company on ego and reputation, cutting corners on materials, underbidding on projects to win contracts, and financing it all with mountains of debt. He had a bloated management team filled with cronies and unqualified relatives. Employee morale was at an all-time low. The company was a grand, historic facade with a rotten foundation. Liam's team had identified the fatal flaw months ago, a massive, prestigious skyscraper project downtown, the Thorn Tower, that Richard saw as his legacy. Richard had won the bid by promising an impossible timeline and an unrealistically low budget. To meet it, he was using substandard steel and a non-union workforce with questionable safety records. It was a ticking time bomb. The structural analysis on the primary load-bearing beams is alarming, said a young analyst named Anya, pointing to a series of complex graphs on a monitor. The specified steel grade is 20% below the industry standard for a building of this height. A moderate seismic event, or even sustained high winds, could lead to catastrophic failure. He's not just risking his company, Liam murmured, tracing the lines of the building's blueprint with his finger. He's risking lives. This was no longer just a financial game. It was a matter of public safety. His acquisition had moved from a strategic opportunity to a moral imperative. He spent hours with his team crafting the day one plan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rescue. The plan involved an immediate halt to the Thorn Tower project, a full structural audit, and the replacement of all substandard materials, no matter the cost. It involved firing Richard's entire sycophantic executive team and promoting talented, overlooked managers from within the company. One name came up repeatedly: David Chen, a veteran project manager Richard had fired 6 months ago for raising concerns about the very safety issues they were now uncovering. Liam made a note: find David Chen immediately. While Liam was methodically planning the reconstruction of his father-in-law's company, Richard was at the Thorn Tower site, blissfully unaware, playing the part of the magnate. He strode through the bustling construction zone in a hard hat and an expensive suit, barking orders, clapping workers on the back, a king surveying his kingdom. He saw the rapidly rising skeleton of the tower not as a danger, but as a monument to his own genius. He dismissed the whispers of cut corners as the grumblings of lazy union men. He saw the mounting invoices and worried calls from creditors as minor annoyances, the cost of doing business on a grand scale. His confidence was absolute, his blindness profound. The catalyst came on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't the dramatic collapse Anya had feared. Not yet. It was something smaller, but just as damning. A city inspector making a surprise visit noticed a hairline fracture in a recently poured concrete support column on the 12th floor. Standard procedure would be a minor citation and a localized repair. But this inspector was new, diligent, and not on Richard's payroll of friendly officials. He pulled the project's material manifests. He cross-referenced them with the submitted architectural plans. He saw the discrepancies, the cheap steel, the altered concrete mix. Within hours, a stop work order was issued. The story was leaked to a hungry local news blogger. The headline was brutal: Thorn Tower halted amid safety concerns, allegations of fraudulent materials. The news spread like fire. By Friday morning, it was on the front page of the city's business journal. Thorn Construction stock, already fragile, began to hemorrhage value. Creditors who had been patient for months suddenly became frantic. The house of cards Richard had built over a decade of arrogance began to sway in the wind. The quiet before the storm was over. The gale had arrived. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Richard Thorne's phone began ringing the moment the market opened, and it did not stop. Each call was a fresh wave in the tsunami that was crashing down upon him. The bank that held the primary loan on the Thorn Tower project was threatening to call in the entire note. Subcontractors, fearing they wouldn't be paid, were walking off his other job sites. The company's stock ticker on the financial news network was a waterfall of red, a digital representation of a lifetime's work evaporating in real time. Richard, a man whose entire identity was built on the projection of absolute control, was spiraling into a panic. He locked himself in his opulent office, a space that now felt like a gilded cage. He yelled at his assistants. He made frantic, pleading calls to the old friends on various boards and banks who had always helped him smooth things over in the past. But this was different. The word fraud was now attached to his name. The potential for a public safety disaster made him toxic. For the first time in his life, Richard Thorne found the doors of the Old Boys Club slammed shut in his face. His calls went to voicemail. His requests for emergency credit lines were met with polite but firm refusals. At home, Chloe was experiencing the disaster on a different, more social level. Her phone was also buzzing, but with texts from her circle of high society friends. The messages started as feigned concern. "OMG, is everything okay? Saw the news," but quickly revealed their true, gossipy nature. She could read the subtext, the schadenfreude, the delicious thrill of seeing the mighty fall. Her status, which was entirely derived from her father's, was disintegrating. She was no longer the daughter of a titan, she was the daughter of a potential criminal. Her panic, unlike her father's, was not directed outward at the world, but inward, at her own home. She stormed through the house looking for Liam. She found him in his study, calmly sketching in a notebook, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. The sheer normalcy of the scene, his peaceful focus in the midst of her world imploding, sent her into a rage. "Are you seeing this?" she demanded, shoving her phone in his face, displaying the damning news headlines. "My father's company is collapsing. Our family is being destroyed. And you're just sitting here, drawing." Liam looked up from his sketchbook, his expression unreadable. "I saw the news," he said quietly. "And that's it? I saw the news? My father could go to jail. We could lose everything, and you're doing nothing." The "we" was telling. Suddenly, his fortunes were tied to hers again. "What would you have me do, Chloe?" he asked, the same question he had asked in the car, but this time it carried a different weight. "I don't know. Something. You're a man, aren't you? You should be helping, calling people, supporting my father." "Your father has made it very clear over the past 5 years that he neither wants nor values my support," Liam stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "He wouldn't take my call even if I made it." "So you're just going to sit back and watch him fail?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Out of what? Spite? Because he was mean to you? Is your pride really more important than our family?" He closed his sketchbook, the leather cover making a soft, final sound. He stood up and faced her. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity, perhaps even sorrow. "This isn't about my pride, Chloe. Your father's problems are the result of years of his own choices. Cutting corners, valuing profit over integrity, believing he was above the rules. This was always going to happen. The inspector's report just set the timeline." His calm, analytical assessment of the situation infuriated her more than any angry outburst could have. "I can't believe you," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "I knew you were passive, but I didn't think you were cold. My world is falling apart, and you're lecturing me like a philosophy professor." She backed away from him, a look of genuine disgust on her face. "I need to go to him. At least someone in this marriage knows what loyalty means." She turned and ran from the room, grabbing her keys and purse. A moment later, the front door slammed shut. Liam stood alone in the quiet study. He felt a profound weariness settle over him. He had held out a sliver of hope that this crisis might reveal a different side of Chloe, a strength of character that had been buried under her obsession with status. He had hoped she might see her father's failings for what they were. Instead, she had doubled down, clinging to the sinking ship, her loyalty not to a person, but to an idea of power. He walked over to his desk and picked up his phone. He dialed a number from memory. "Anya," he said, his voice now devoid of any emotional turmoil, replaced by the crisp, clear tone of a commander. "It's time. The patient is in cardiac arrest. We need to intervene." "We're ready, Liam." Her voice came back, sharp and efficient. "The notices are prepared. The proxies are confirmed." "Good," Liam said. "Tell the board of Thorn Construction that the majority shareholder is calling an emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, at their headquarters. And Anya, clear my entire schedule." He hung up the phone. He looked out the window as Chloe's car sped down the street, racing toward a past that was already gone. Tomorrow, he would introduce her and her father to the future. The boardroom of Thorn Construction was on the top floor of their old, ostentatious headquarters, a building from another era. It was a room designed to intimidate, with dark mahogany paneling, a massive, imposing table, and a dozen high-backed leather chairs that resembled thrones. Portraits of Richard's father and grandfather, stern-faced men of industry, stared down from the walls, judging all who entered. On this morning, the room was thick with an atmosphere of dread. Richard Thorne sat at the head of the table, his usual ruddy complexion a pasty, unhealthy gray. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled papers he wasn't reading. The remaining board members, a collection of aging, terrified men who owed their positions to Richard's patronage, sat scattered around the table, avoiding his gaze. They were waiting for a miracle, a last-minute rescue from their leader. But Richard had no miracles left. He had called this meeting out of desperation, hoping to rally his troops, to project a confidence he no longer felt. He planned to blame a rogue inspector, a biased media, a conspiracy of his competitors, anyone but himself. At precisely 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors to the boardroom swung open. Every head turned, expecting a lawyer with more bad news or a banker with a foreclosure notice. Instead, it was Liam. He was not dressed in his usual casual attire. He wore a bespoke, dark charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was neatly styled. He looked like he belonged in this room more than anyone present. But it wasn't just the clothes, it was his demeanor. He walked with a quiet, unshakable confidence, an aura of authority that was utterly at odds with the man they thought they knew. He was not alone. Flanking him were two individuals. One was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 30s, her eyes missing nothing. This was Anya, his chief strategist. The other was a man in his 50s with a kind, intelligent face and silvering hair. Several board members gasped in recognition. It was David Chen, the respected project manager Richard had unceremoniously fired. Richard stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. "Liam? What in God's name are you doing here?" he sputtered, a mixture of confusion and fury coloring his voice. "This is a private board meeting. Get out and take your people with you." Liam didn't respond to the outburst. He walked calmly to the table, not to one of the empty chairs along the side, but to the one directly opposite Richard, the chair reserved for the vice chairman. Anya and David Chen stood behind him, silent and watchful. "I believe I am in the right place," Liam said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "This meeting was in fact called at my request." Richard's face contorted in disbelief. "Your request? You have no standing here. You're an architect. You design patios. Security!" he bellowed, fumbling for an intercom button on the console in front of him. "That won't be necessary, Richard," Liam said, his voice hardening slightly, taking on an edge of command that made Richard's hand freeze. "I would advise everyone to sit down and listen. It will save us all a great deal of time and further embarrassment." There was something in his tone, a core of absolute steel, that silenced the room. The blustering, terrified board members sank back into their chairs. Richard remained standing, his face flushed with rage, but a seed of doubt, of pure, cold fear, had been planted. Liam placed his old, familiar leather journal on the polished table, the symbolic object. It looked so out of place amidst the corporate documents and sleek tablets. He opened it, not to a page of sketches, but to a section with neatly tabbed documents. "For the past 5 years," Liam began, his eyes sweeping across the terrified faces around the table, "my firm, Ethelred Capital, has been quietly acquiring assets in the construction and real estate sectors. We specialize in identifying undervalued or mismanaged companies with strong foundational potential." He let the words hang in the air. Ethelred Capital. The name meant nothing to them. It was a ghost. 3 months ago, he continued, our analysis identified Thorn Construction as a prime candidate, a company with a legacy brand, a skilled workforce, but suffering from a severe leadership deficit, unsustainable debt, and dangerous operational practices. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood was draining from his face. Liam slid a single, crisp document across the table toward his father-in-law. It was a summary of share acquisitions. Over the last 10 weeks, Ethelred Capital has become the majority shareholder of Thorn Holdings International. As of this morning, we control 58% of the voting stock, which means, he paused, letting the final, devastating truth land. This company, this building and everything in it, now belongs to me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe ending. The portraits of the old thorns on the wall seemed to look down in stunned disbelief. Richard stared at the paper, then at Liam, his mind refusing to accept what he was hearing. No, he whispered. It's not possible. It's a trick, a lie. Anya stepped forward and placed a thick, bound portfolio on the table with a heavy thud. The full documentation is all here, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice cool and professional. SEC filings, brokerage receipts, proxy assignments. It is all perfectly legal and irrevocably final. Ethelred Capital is the new parent company of Thorn Construction. The truth was undeniable, a monolithic fact that had just crushed Richard's reality. He sank into his chair, his body deflating as if his bones had turned to dust. The arrogant titan of industry was gone, replaced by a broken old man. And in that moment, the boardroom door opened once more. It was Chloe. She had rushed here from her father's side, expecting to offer moral support, to witness him rally his forces. Instead, she walked into the middle of his execution. She saw her husband, the Downgrade, sitting at the head of her father's table, in total command. She saw her father, shrunken and defeated. She saw the stunned, fearful faces of the board. The world tilted on its axis. The man she had ridiculed, the man she had called an anchor, was not just successful. He was a king who had just conquered her father's kingdom without ever firing a shot. And she, in her blindness, had called him a failure. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it stole the very breath from her lungs. The scene in the boardroom was frozen for a long moment, a tableau of shattered illusions. Chloe stood by the door, her hands still on the handle, her mind reeling. Her gaze darted from her husband, a figure of impossible authority at the head of the table, to her father, who looked as though he had aged 20 years in a matter of seconds. The entire foundation of her world, her belief in the hierarchy of power and worth, had been pulverized. Liam broke the silence. He didn't look at Chloe. His focus was entirely on the business at hand. He was no longer a husband or a son-in-law in this room. He was the chairman of the board. Let's be clear about what happens now, he said, his voice resonating with calm, decisive power. As of this moment, Richard Thorne is removed as CEO and chairman of Thorne Construction. His position on the board is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do that, Richard rasped, a flicker of his old defiance returning. I built this company. My father built this company. It has my name on it. You built it and you nearly destroyed it, Liam countered, his voice remaining level, free of malice. This was not about punishment. It was about correction. Your name is on the building, Richard, but your legacy was about to be corporate manslaughter. The Thorn Tower project is a disaster waiting to happen. You used substandard materials and falsified safety reports to protect your ego and your bottom line. You put hundreds of lives at risk. That is not a legacy. That is a crime. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, a truth that Richard could not refute. This was the moral mirror, and the reflection it showed was hideous. I am appointing Mr. David Chen as interim CEO, Liam continued, gesturing to the man beside him. Mr. Chen is a man of integrity and experience, who was fired for trying to warn you about the very dangers we are now facing. His first act will be to implement a full, top-to-bottom safety and structural audit of all active projects, starting with the immediate and indefinite shutdown of Thorn Tower. David Chen nodded gravely. My team is already on standby. We will begin work this afternoon. Liam then turned his attention to the rest of the board. The rest of you have a choice. You can tender your resignations today and walk away, or you can stay and help us rebuild this company on a new foundation of quality, safety, and integrity. But know this, the era of cronyism and willful ignorance is over. You will be expected to perform, to be accountable. There are no more free rides. He had systematically and efficiently dismantled Richard's entire power structure in less than 5 minutes. Finally, he allowed his gaze to drift towards Chloe, who was still frozen by the door. He didn't speak to her directly, but his next words were clearly intended for her as much as for her father. For years, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, I have sat at your dinner table and listened to lectures about what it means to be a powerhouse. I've been told that value is a number on a balance sheet. I have been mocked for choosing a profession I love, for valuing craftsmanship over empty prestige. He looked directly at Richard. You saw me as a failure, a hobbyist. Then his eyes found Chloe's. You called me a downgrade. You called me an anchor. You were ashamed of me because I didn't fit your definition of success. He let the words settle, a quiet list of grievances delivered not with anger, but with a profound and sorrowful clarity. Well, here is the truth. The hobby you mocked has given me a life of purpose, and the capital you worship, the silent, patient capital I manage, is what just saved this family's name from being associated with a tragedy. I didn't do this to spite you. I did this because it was necessary. This company was a danger to the public, and you, he said, his gaze locking onto Richard, were a danger to this company. The work of fixing it begins now. With that, he stood up. Anya will circulate the relevant documents. David, the floor is yours. He had said all he needed to say. He had redrawn the map of their world, and he had done it without raising his voice, without a single insult. He had done it with the simple, devastating power of the truth. As he began to walk towards the door, Chloe finally found her voice. Liam, she whispered, her voice choked with a combination of awe and horror. He paused as he reached her, his expression not triumphant, but weary. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw him. Not the disappointing husband, not the failed architect, but a man of immense, hidden depth and strength. A man she had completely and utterly misjudged. I didn't know, she stammered, the words feeling pathetic and small. That, Liam said, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of a final judgment, is the whole problem. He walked past her and out of the boardroom, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her old life. She was left with the unbearable knowledge that the man she had pushed away was the very source of the power she craved, and that she had traded a king for the fantasy of a prince. The silence he left behind was filled with the sound of her world collapsing. The immediate aftermath in the boardroom was chaos distilled into stunned silence. As Liam departed, the authority in the room transferred seamlessly to David Chen, who began issuing calm, clear directives. He spoke of logistics, audits, and personnel reviews. The remaining board members, humbled and terrified, listened with a newfound attentiveness. They were no longer Richard's cronies. They were employees of a new, unknown power. Richard Thorne remained in his chair, a king deposed. He stared at the documents Anya had placed before him, but the words swam, meaningless. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed at the very game he thought he had mastered. And the architect of his demise was the quiet, unassuming man he had dismissed as a lightweight, a nobody. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on him, crushing his breath. He tried to speak, to muster one last roar of defiance, but only a dry, rattling sound emerged. Two discreet security guards, who had been waiting outside, entered the room. They were not the brutish thugs Richard might have employed. They were professional, polite, and firm. One of them gently touched Richard's shoulder. "Mr. Thorne, I think it's time to go." Richard was escorted from the room he had commanded for 30 years, not in handcuffs, but in a quiet, devastating procession of irrelevance. He didn't even look at Chloe as he passed. Chloe, meanwhile, was experiencing a vertigo so profound she had to lean against the wall for support. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: shock, shame, and a strange, terrifying flicker of admiration. The entire social structure she had built her life upon had been a lie. The wealth and status she worshipped were fragile, and the man she had belittled held all the real cards. She stumbled out of the boardroom, her legs unsteady, and saw Liam at the far end of the hall, speaking quietly with Anya. He was no longer her husband in that moment. He was a foreign dignitary, a powerful figure from a world she hadn't known existed. She had to talk to him. She had to fix this. "Liam!" she called out, her voice desperate. He turned, his conversation with Anya ending with a slight nod. He waited for Chloe to approach, his expression patient but distant. "Liam, I am so sorry," she began, the words tumbling out. "I had no idea. I was a fool. I was awful. Please, you have to forgive me." He listened, his head tilted slightly, as if analyzing a foreign language. He saw the tears in her eyes, the genuine panic on her face, but he also saw what was behind it. She wasn't apologizing for hurting him. She was apologizing for being wrong. Her apology was born of the shock of his power, not of empathy for his pain. "What are you sorry for, Chloe?" he asked, his voice soft, but the question was a scalpel. "For everything. For what I said, for how I treated you, for being so blind. I was under so much pressure from my father. I wanted us to be successful." "We were successful," he stated simply. "We had a home we loved. We had each other. I had work that fulfilled me. That was my definition of success. It just wasn't yours." "But it can be," she insisted, reaching out to touch his arm. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. "Now I see. I understand. What you've done, it's incredible. You're incredible. We can be a team, a real power couple, you and me. Think of what we can do together." Her words, meant to be conciliatory, were the most damning indictment of all. She still didn't get it. She saw his power not as a tool for building a better company or for acting with integrity, but as a new, more potent source of the status she craved. She was immediately trying to co-opt his victory, to rebrand herself as the queen to his newfound king. A deep, profound sadness settled over Liam. He looked at the woman he had once loved so deeply and realized the person he had married no longer existed, if she ever had at all. She was a reflection of the world she grew up in, a world that measured worth in dollars and dominance. "Chloe," he said, and the gentleness in his voice was more heartbreaking than any shout would have been. "What I did here today, this wasn't for us. It wasn't to impress you or to get back at your father. It was because it was the right thing to do. The company was rotten. People could have been hurt. The work I'm about to do here has to be guided by principle, not by ego or a desire for status." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't think you understand that. I don't think you want to." "I can change," she pleaded. "I swear, I can be different." "Can you?" he asked, the question hanging between them. "Or do you just want to be on the winning team? Last week you were ashamed of me. Today you want to be my partner. The only thing that has changed is your perception of my bank account. The man is the same." He gently removed her hand from his arm. The gesture was not unkind, but it was final. It was the severing of a bond that had already been broken. "I have a lot of work to do," he said. "You should go home." He turned and walked away, back toward the boardroom where his new life, his real work, was waiting. Chloe watched him go, the full weight of his words crashing down on her. The man is the same. She had been married to a giant and had spent years trying to cut him down to her size. Now he was walking away, and she was left alone in the hallway, smaller and more insignificant than she had ever felt in her entire life. The tears that came now were not of panic or of shame, but of a true and devastating loss. The 3 months that followed were a period of radical transformation, both for Thorn Construction and for the lives shattered in its boardroom. Under the steady, expert hand of David Chen, guided by Liam's strategic vision, the company was stripped down to its studs and rebuilt. The rot was carved out. Richard's entire coterie of unqualified executives was dismissed. In their place, David promoted talented engineers, project managers, and accountants from within the company, people who had been overlooked and silenced for years. Morale, which had been abysmal, slowly began to climb as employees realized the new leadership valued competence over connections. The Thorn Tower project became a symbol of this new era. Liam and David made the costly but necessary decision to dismantle the top 5 floors and replace all the compromised steel and concrete. They held a press conference, not to spin or deflect, but to be transparent. They admitted the company's past failures and laid out a clear, detailed plan to rectify them. The public, so used to corporate denial, responded with surprised respect. The stock, which had hit rock bottom, began a slow, steady climb, buoyed by confidence in the new, honest leadership. Liam was rarely at the company headquarters. He trusted David. He managed his empire the way he always had, quietly, from his serene office at Aethelred Capital, the architect drawing up the blueprints for a stronger, more ethical structure. The consequences for the Thorn family were just as profound. Richard, stripped of his title and his power, became a ghost. He refused to leave his massive, empty mansion, a prisoner in his own monument to a status he no longer possessed. His friends stopped calling. The invitations stopped arriving. He spent his days drinking, watching financial news, and railing against the son-in-law who had stolen his world, blind to the fact that he had handed him the keys himself. He was a man hollowed out by his own hubris. Chloe's fall was different. With her father's disgrace, her social standing evaporated overnight. The friends who had flocked to her side now avoided her calls. The world of galas, charity balls, and exclusive resorts was closed to her. For the first time in her life, she was forced to live without the insulating layer of wealth and status. She had to get a job. After weeks of searching, leveraging an old art history degree she had long forgotten, she found a position as a gallery assistant in a small, independent art gallery downtown. The work was humbling. She made coffee, answered phones, and dealt with temperamental artists. Her salary was a fraction of her former monthly clothing budget. She sold her designer car and took the bus. She moved out of the grand house Liam had designed, a place that now felt haunted by her mistakes, and into a small, one-bedroom apartment. But a strange thing happened. Stripped of all the external markers of her identity, Chloe was forced to confront the person who remained. At first, she was miserable, consumed by bitterness and self-pity. But slowly, grudgingly, something began to shift. She started paying attention to the art in the gallery, listening to the artists talk about their passion, their struggles, their dedication to their craft. She saw in them the same quiet integrity she had once so carelessly dismissed in Liam. She began to find a small, quiet satisfaction in her own work, in earning her own money, in building something, however modest, that was entirely her own. She was beginning to discover a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to a last name or a bank statement. Liam, for his part, had made no move to formalize their separation. He paid the bills for the house, which now sat empty, and ensured she had enough to land on her feet. But he kept his distance. He was not interested in punishing her. He was giving her the space to find her own way. He knew that any reconciliation, if it were ever to be possible, could not happen until she had fully reckoned with herself, far from his shadow or his influence. He poured his energy into his work, both the architecture he loved and the corporate restructuring that had become his responsibility. He was building things that lasted, just as he had always wanted to. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was visiting one of his own architectural projects, a small community library he had designed pro bono for a low-income neighborhood. He was standing on the sidewalk, watching the construction workers, when he saw her. Chloe was walking down the street on her way home from the gallery. She looked different. Her clothes were simpler, her hair was tied back, and the hard, anxious edge she had always carried was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet weariness that was surprisingly graceful. She saw him at the same time. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the street, two different people than they had been 3 months ago. The anger was gone. The bitterness had faded. All that was left was the vast, quiet space of what had been lost, and the tentative question of what might yet be built. After a long, charged moment of silence across the busy street, Liam gave a slight nod and crossed over to her. The noise of the city seemed to fade as he approached. Chloe clutched the strap of her shoulder bag, her knuckles white, a nervous gesture he hadn't seen from her in a long time. "Hello, Chloe," he said. His voice was gentle, without any hint of accusation or triumph. "Liam," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "The library, it's beautiful." She was looking past him at the rising structure of wood and glass. It was a modest building, but it had a grace and warmth that was unmistakably his design. "It's for the neighborhood kids," he said. "A place to read, a place to be safe." He said it simply, a statement of fact, but she heard the underlying principle. He was building something for others, something of value that had nothing to do with profit. I got a job," she said, as if needing to present her own small offering of progress. "At an art gallery. It's not much, but I like it." "I know," he said. "Anya keeps me updated." The mention of his strategist was a gentle reminder of the vast, powerful world he inhabited, a world she was no longer part of. Yet he had been keeping tabs on her, ensuring she was okay. The thought was both comforting and painful. "How is your father?" he asked. It was a question he had to ask, a final piece of business to be settled. Chloe's expression clouded over. "He's the same," she said, her voice heavy with a sad resignation. "He hasn't changed. He still thinks he's the victim. He blames you. He blames the world. He'll never see his own part in it." In her words, Liam heard a final, painful acceptance. She was no longer her father's defender. She saw him clearly now, with all his flaws. They stood in silence for another moment, two people who had shared a life, now standing as near strangers on a city sidewalk. The chasm between them was still there, but it was no longer filled with anger and resentment. It was filled with a quiet, shared sorrow. "Liam, I know it's too late," Chloe began, her voice trembling slightly. "And I know sorry is a useless word now, but I need you to know that I see it. I was so wrong. I wasn't just blind, I was empty. I measured my own worth by the reflection I saw in other people's eyes. I thought status was a shield, but it's not. It's a cage. And you were the one person who was trying to show me a world outside of it, and I was too afraid to look." Her confession was raw, honest, and stripped of any agenda. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or a second chance. She was simply stating the truth she had discovered in the wreckage of her life. Liam listened, and for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of the old connection. Not of romantic love, but of a shared humanity. He saw the woman he had first fallen in love with, the one buried under years of social conditioning and fear. "True worth, Chloe," he said softly, giving voice to the central theme of their entire story, "is about what you build, not what you own. It's about the integrity of your work, the quality of your character. It's quiet, it's patient, it doesn't need an audience." He looked at the library, then back at her. It took me a long time to learn that. It looks like you're starting to learn it too. It was not an absolution, but it was an acknowledgement. An acknowledgement of her painful, nascent growth. What happens to us now? She asked, the question full of a fragile, uncertain hope. He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, complicated sadness. The damage had been too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. The trust, once shattered, could not simply be glued back together. I think, he said with finality, we start to build our own separate lives. You're building something real for yourself now, Chloe. For the first time, don't do it for me, do it for you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, understanding. It was a painful ending, but it was also a beginning. He was giving her the gift of a clean slate, a chance to become the person she was meant to be, on her own terms. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Be well, Chloe. You too, Liam, she whispered. He turned and walked back toward his construction site, toward the future he was building. Chloe watched him go, a figure of quiet strength and unshakable integrity. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction, toward her small apartment and her new, uncertain life. The story of their marriage was over, but their individual stories were just beginning, now founded on a truth that was harder, but far more solid, than the illusions they had left behind. This story is a powerful reminder that our value isn't defined by our job titles, our bank accounts, or the opinions of others. It's defined by our character, our integrity, and the quiet strength with which we navigate the world. True worth is built, not bought. What did you think of Liam's final decision? Was it the right one? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more content that explores the deeper truths of the human heart. Thank you for being here with us today.